So we've just had something kind of, well, it is a big deal, isn't it?
Breaking.
Yeah,
honestly.
breaking
It's kind
news.
of breaking news
Yeah.
from our perspective.
Okay, I'll let you. I'm not going to spoil it. I'll let you reveal it.
So yeah, Google, they have had a series of developer announcements on Thursday, and the big one here in regards to Android is they are setting the schedule for the 2025 and Android releases. And the big thing is they basically signposted that Android 16 is happening in Q2 of next year. So that's April to June, but I'd say that's probably June. So the way they framed it is they are having two notable releases in 2025. The biggest in Q2 is a major API release, which for all intents and purposes has to be Android 16. And that's followed up by a smaller release that has API impacts or new features for app developers to adopt in Q4, so December. In between those Q2 and Q4 moments, these big moments that Google is telling developers ahead of time, there will be the usual Q1 and Q3, basically QPR, quarterly platform releases. So that's unchanged, that's continuing. Everything will still be beta tested, but the big thing, very big thing right now, is that Android 16 happening in Q2.
To me, that seems insane. But at the same time, kind of taking a step back, it reminds me a little bit, although it's not quite as big, is the idea of having the Android 12L. That's all I can think first and foremost. This also means that we're going to be delving into Android updates a hell of a lot earlier than we would have expected, right? Like 3-4 months earlier than usual.
Yeah.
What do you think in terms of
Instead
like
of
the
early
size?
February.
Yeah. I mean, it's insane. It feels insane.
Yeah, instead of early February, conceivably, we could be heading into the beta season by the developer preview by Android 16 by next month or December, but it has to start sooner than later, given how fast Google is pushing this. But in terms of a big release, I would assume so. There's some stuff about design changes already percolating. Quick settings has been a redesign, an overhaul that has been enabled. But I think the thing to look forward to is what Google, again, telegraphed back at I.O. The Android team said they were re-architecting Android with AI at its core, something along those lines. And I think in the way that we saw a slew of the main iOS 18 theme this year was AI, from like notification summaries and just integrating AI system-wide. I feel like that's where the next step of Android's AI additions to Android are happening. So
I'm just thinking, obviously a bit selfishly, because, hey, you know that we like to catalog Android here. My first and foremost thought is, where do we see the biggest changes initially? Do you think this is obviously they're going to be building it with AI at the core. Do we think that that's going to be integrated into terms of like useful features? Or do we think there's going to be like, because reading between the lines, there's a lot of things we can kind of surmise from this. But my initial impression is, how is this going to affect the user in the kind of the short term?
Mm-hmm. So we already have AI in Android right now. AI Core running Gemini Nano. This was announced last December. So Google definitely got the jump on Apple here. There are stuff using significant on-device AI right now. It's mostly first-party apps like Recorder, that kind of stuff. And then Samsung, the Google Messages app uses the on-device Gemini Nano, and with the Pixel 9, there's the big Gemini Nano with multimodality update for features like that spam warnings while you're on the call. That was also announced at I.O., but hasn't launched yet. So these first wave of AI features, they are Google features, but they are rolling, but they're not, with a system component, but they're definitely happening on the app level. I think Google's next phase here, and they have to, is to add it directly into the OS itself in terms of OS system level features. So like I said, I feel like something like notification summaries are a must given the competitive landscape with Apple. To me, that's the biggest stuff. Like just
notification summaries,
AI summaries.
I love that notification summaries is the biggest one, but I do agree with you. I think that's something that Google could do very well because they have historically done notifications better than iOS. But so my first thought is, how are we going to see more, I'd say, day-to-day usability experience enhancements? Because it feels, do you not think that sometimes with the way that we've been going over the last few years with Android, it has
the UI overhaul.
The UI overhaul, I don't think it's necessary all of the time because it is a bit silly to just keep doing that. Like, I mean, look at a desktop OS, for instance. Most desktop OSs haven't changed in 15 years.
Matured. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, so like you hit a point, you hit an inflection point usually with an OS where you go down one route and then that's what happens. I'm very worried that, and I know I've mentioned it in the podcast before. I mean, we're 30 episodes in now, so we're gonna come full circle again. My biggest worries were that we would end up in a situation where the audience or the users out there, hopefully you guys listening who are listening to this podcast, you want an overhaul more than you want a stable OS. Like, you want to see things being changed. And I know you mentioned like the quick settings panel. Do we reach a point now where AI just bleeds in everywhere and we end up with a mess of a version of Android? Because that's my biggest concern.
So it's in terms of the OS itself. So I guess in Google's Pixel case, it's the Pixel launcher. I don't. The AI. It depends how long. Where everybody's assuming a UI overhaul since it's been static for so many years, but conceivably the AI stuff could have thrown a wrench into all that in terms of Google deciding that they need to get AI first into Android before an overhaul. That's not to say that quick settings will be a big BFD, because that's going to be a big deal. Obviously, you interact with that a lot. Maybe at the lock screen stuff, but I don't know, like the Pixel launcher, again on Pixel devices, the home screen itself. I think if quick settings and notifications visually are changing, I think that meets the checkbox for big UI overhaul. Then with all the AI stuff coming in, and how apps can integrate, I think that's the next big tentpole. It's enough of a tentpole, rather.
I agree with you. I think a lot of people might not agree with you who want to see these huge changes. I'm very interested as well seeing those. I mean, obviously, it's very, very early, and it's a kind of a feature that's in a work in progress. But seeing the overhaul to quick settings, it's amazing to me how it basically is the Android 11 quick settings, but with a little bit of customization and material you thrown in. So we've kind of we're going back on ourselves. It's really weird how all these things change and then we end up going back to what we were before.
I was absolutely furious going from 9 quick settings to 8, but I've kind of gotten over it. I'm perfectly fine with today's quick settings, honestly. Yeah, one more would be nice, and even an even more dense panel would be great. But I don't know. I think the question is how it evolves with Material U. Historically, these big design changes have coincided with equally big new material design languages. But for the sake of argument, Material 4. But I don't know, Material 3, Material U with dynamic color theming, it still feels like it has some legs to me. And
no, I agree with you. I think it does.
What,
I think it does. I think it really is one of those things that Google's kind of like nailed out of the gate. I think, to be honest with you, with that in that regard, it makes iOS feel very staid and very plain in comparison, and it makes what I will say is that I think obviously we're both Android users, and I do dabble with iOS as well. I find that with what we've been doing on Android, I say we, I'm the royal we. What we've seen on Android is that there has been more of a risk taking in terms of the design to separate it from what iOS is doing. Obviously, the Chinese OEMs very much like to imitate, and that's fine. That's part of the cult. I guess that's part of their like homage to the iOS side of things. And I kind of understand why they do that, because hey, iPhone is the most popular individual device going. But I'm kind of glad that Google's said if they're going to stick with Material You and Dynamic Color going forward and evolve upon that, I'm happy with that. I can deal with it. But like I say, it's just interesting to see how. Does it feel like anything's really changed in UI interactions in the last 4 years? I don't really think so. In the grand scheme, across the entire industry, we've had VR, which, hey, I'm not really sold on VR necessarily. We've had slab phones for like nearly. It's probably closer to 20 years than it is. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like we're at a point where there isn't much more we can do. We're probably at the very, very plateau, and every single tiny little change now is really, really, really insignificant versus what we've seen previously. Maybe we're getting a bit tired with it. I don't know.
I guess a possible next trend in UI design and Android UI design is the idea of dynamic UIs to change and rearrange. This is me. I'm thinking of it from a widget. Let's say on your home screen, you have like the actual icons you have for the widgets change depending on the context of the day. That to me is like a possible next direction, which I think AI would probably help. Imagine if just like depending on the time of day, your home screen changes based on with AI awareness. That maybe that starts by happening, and you get a widget panel with some apps that you might use every day that changes. Or Google has been, a few years ago, they added if you leave your dock empty, you can have it be filled in with icons that change day to day. That never went anywhere, obviously. And but yeah, that could be a possible direction. I don't know. It's up to them to change, but I don't know. Maybe stuff with translucency or floating panels. That could be the design direction that Android goes. I'm thinking of how Google Chat has this floating bottom bar, basically, which is neither here nor there in terms of who uses Google Chat out in personal context. But the idea of it's a floating panel basically at the bottom of your screen, a floating bottom bar. And the idea is that you can see your background. It floats above the feed. So I don't know, maybe that's a direction. But I think I feel like AI, if I were a betting man, I feel like AI happens first before a big visual revamp.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Because obviously we're trying to count our chickens before they've hatched. It is a bit weird in that it almost feels like we're still reeling from Android 15. What are we, 3 weeks on-ish from Android 15 launching? And then obviously the AOSP was before that. But like, it feels like Android 15 was very much, it could be, I mean, depending on what happens, it could very much be the sign-off. When we get that feature drop in December, that could be the actual sign-off of the first phase of Material You and Android that we've had since 12 era. And we've had 4 years of kind of refinement and not major redesigns, because Android 12 was a huge shift, right? It was huge. So yeah, I sometimes have to kind of pinch myself and think, okay, Android 12 was massive. And I sometimes go back and watch my video of that 45-minute video, just going through every single little change. And I think to myself, wow, that was a substantial amount of work that went into that. And obviously it was perfectly aligned with this, with the launch of the Pixel 6 series, sorry. So we had that Tensor chip as well. So it doesn't feel like it's going to feel like weird in that we're going to have Android 16 in this. I mean, what would the earliest be? You say June? I mean, that doesn't seem that long away, does it? To have a full release in that period of time, and we could be testing this as soon as the next couple of weeks. And that now I'm laughing thinking about it, because that means an insane amount of crossover with what's happening with the feature drops. And what do you think? What do you think the reason for this is? Because I know there's a few tidbits that Google alluded to. What do you think is the core reason for this?
It's it's funny because in the sense it's the Pixel drives the Android release cycle at this point. It's Pixel moved and then Android is moving with it. It now helps that they're part of the same division, basically. They are, but yeah, it's the idea. We still don't have a proper reason on why Pixel decided to go early into late summer instead of fall. Going ahead of the iPhone, maybe, sure.
Just interjecting there, I genuinely think that was it was a bold move by Google to do that. They had the stones to do it, and I think respect to them for doing it, because obviously for the first time in what feels like, I mean, the 8 series, the fallout from the 8 series was very positive, but it feels very much like every single person is aligned almost. I mean, obviously there's a lot of detractors out there who think that we should be having Snapdragon chips in Pixels again, and to some extent I do agree, and there's certain things that definitely need to be fixed from a premium positioned Pixel, if I can say that. I think that the Pixel 9 series has been really, really well received, and obviously I use a Pixel daily, and I think that it has improved. They've improved the experience over the last 3 years quite drastically. But yeah, I do think. Sorry to interrupt at that point, but yeah, you make a good point in that shifting it forward ahead of the iPhone has probably had this major knock-on effect, right?
Yeah, and for everybody else, if the late flagship launches of the year can also get Android, the question is, what does Samsung do? Because they're obviously a big player in all this, and I'm wondering how. Okay, so they like the early of the year position. The OS, a new OS, isn't make or break, so to speak, as long as they do their One UI stuff over it. So I wonder if this gets Samsung to move.
Oh, that's a really good point. I didn't even consider that, because what are we looking at? S25 series in January. Usually, obviously, we've as of recording.
February at the latest.
As of recording, the OnePlus 13 has just been announced in China. So we're looking at a Western launch, a couple of months later, potentially. Oh, there's 2 devices there that are going to launch on, obviously, within 3 months, potentially of launch. 3 or 4 months of launch. They're looking at updating literally 5 months down the line after they're launching. That seemed, that's strange. Because how are Samsung going to do that? Like, that's going to be weird. Are they going to sell their devices on the potential future software updates? A bit like what Apple have done with Apple Intelligence. Because you're going to, obviously, the S25 series. Does that mean that the Pixel's in a more power position again? That's really strange as well, right?
Kind of does. If, again, for the people that care about this stuff, though I'm fully cognizant of how many people care about this stuff. But yeah, Google's blog post announcing this change was phrased along the lines of to help us better account for device launches or something like that. And that's clearly the Pixel. I'm not sure who else gets into that pool, but Google said they're working to quickly add to make sure OEMs get onto this Q2 launch. Yeah.
Oof, I'm very intrigued now to see what happens, because obviously Samsung are still preparing their Android 15 build. OnePlus, they're the only 2 that I can think of off the top of my head. They've just confirmed that they have an open preview beta phase for that, which is technically limited to India, which I find strange, but I imagine that'll be global soon. So their rollout will be fairly fast. But yeah, this could have some substantial knock-on effects on our next range of flagships in 2025, because obviously, if no one's shipping with that, obviously that stable release initially in that early portion of the year, does that affect? Do Samsung care? Does Samsung do they just say, okay, we're going to hold back the launch? Yeah, it's going to create a strange dichotomy of does this put Pixel in a more powerful position, because obviously they don't have the sales figures to back to kind of compete with those brands. But I hadn't even contemplated them until you brought that up. So this is, I mean, we could sit for hours and just kind of mull over that question itself. I mean, so do you think that this potentially has, obviously we have an Android 16 in that Q2 period. Just looking at that launch window, do you think we could potentially have a release candidate around I/O for the first time?
That would be exciting. So historically, increasingly, the first beta comes a month before I/O, and that's followed by a significant beta 2. But yeah, I think you're right. It's a release candidate by I/O would be quite interesting in terms of. Oh, that's going to be weird. Like you were saying, we have to start thinking about the knockdown effects of all of these. So, so Google, in doing this, they have to announce the changes sooner. So, additionally, I/O allows Google to tease the flagship features of the tent poles of that year's OS. The fast deal was weird in that Android 15 was barely had any tent poles that were actually exclusive to Android 15. I'm thinking of the private spaces one, and the other was the theft features that are now rolled out. But yeah, if they're big UI changes, I feel like Google needs a way to announce those. Okay, let's assuming, let's say we get the first preview next month, the first developer preview next month. We have developer preview 2 in December. Again, pure speculation. If we have beta 1 in January, maybe Google announces at CES? That would be very... I'm not... CES is becoming more of an Android show for Google. And it's usually more ecosystem announcements and features rather than anything for the OS. But I guess CES could be an opportunity for them to announce the user-facing, the big UI changes in Android 16. I guess. But that, like you said, if this release candidate by I/O, they don't get an opportunity to make a huge announcement. They have to start testing it way before the release candidate in terms of the features. So yeah, that's going to be quite strange.
Another strange point that I'm thinking of right now, and it's formulating in my brain, so I'll let it percolate a little bit if this sounds terrible. So usually what we've been seeing over the last few years, and I'm sure anyone out there was some confusion around this when Android 15 launched, we have this QPR beta that sometimes kind of overlaps with what's happening with the next OS, if that makes sense. So it's it's like a preview of another preview.
Yes.
Do we potentially, because obviously QPR is going to, there's nothing to state here that QPR releases are going to cease. There's obviously two definitely planned. Do we potentially foresee portions of Android 16, therefore them being put onto 15 like they do with the QPR releases ahead of time?
They did that right. They
definitely did that last year, right? So we had Android 14 features which were from 15 or initially shown off in developer previews for 15 and beta releases. Does that then because I think it does personally, diminish the result of what Android 16 is going to be as a wholesale OS? But at the same time, I'm wary that if this is the big integration with AI, are they going to hold them back and keep QPR as its own separate thing? It's boggling my mind thinking about the potential connotations here.
By Android 16 launching in Q2 June, I feel like we have QPR1 in December, that's locked, and presumably QPR2 in March. I think it's pretty. If a QPR2 is happening in March, that beta cycle has to happen next month as well. So yes, the overlapping betas and DPs are guaranteed. Maybe QPR2 is lessened, or it isn't as much of a. I don't see Okay, from a pixel feature drop perspective, a QPR2 needs to happen in March, but comparatively, I think it's going to be pretty minor, and QPR2 is going to be the last. If the timing plays out, it's going to be the last release of 15. So that's like such a shortened cycle for Android 15. If the next release after that is 16, and this is all reliant on Google getting the quality stuff, the QA stuff down by then to hit that time frame. Because if they don't have 15, if they don't have 16 ready, it's just 15 patches, like what happened with Android 14 earlier this year, or just 2 months ago. So yeah, that's another knock-on effect to wonder about, because I think Android 15 is probably, it's winding down what Android 15 is going to offer. I think Android 15 QPR2 happens, but at the same time, I think how big it is, it's in question. The other big question about today's announcement to me is why does Google think it needs a minor API release in Q4 that it's already telegraphing to developers? So again, like these API releases, they come with new developer APIs and features for app developers to take advantage of. So what's happening in December, or what's being added to the initial Android 16 release in June, that Google thinks qualifies adding so many new features or significant amount of new features? That's a big thing in the air.
I mean, the obvious one would be a new form of hardware, but it's strange because now
new form factor hardware.
Yeah, like I'm thinking,
which would run.
Yeah, it would run Android, but then again, it's strange. I feel like I'm as confused as you are, and I'm really excited to see what happens with it. But at the same time, I'm also thinking this could be a potential knock-on effect that I didn't. Again, we're learning as we go along here, and I think that's one of the best things about listening to Pixelated. We formulate our opinions as we're speaking them. Here's one thing that has kind of crossed my mind right now. With regard to Android updates, so we have a 7-year update program for Pixel 8 and Pixel 9. Because of the shortened release cycle, the early release cycle, technically, the end of life point at which both these devices get their last Android update is almost going to be identical. So as of this podcast going live, the Pixel 8 and the Pixel 9 will both end on the final they will both end on I can't remember what's the exact number, but they will end on the exact Android version. So I think it's 21. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think both of those devices, because obviously that protracted release cycle being in August and the traditional release cycle would have been October, the Pixel 9 and the Pixel 8, a year, 10 months apart, are both going to finish on Android 21. But with this new update cycle, it would mean that Android Pixel 9 could potentially get that extra update that it is due as a part of its 7-year process. Does this therefore mean that we're going to, in theory, the Pixel 9 could be the most updated device ever that Google's ever had, because it could end up with, it's had one OS update already, it could end up with that one before it finishes, so it could end up with 8 versions of Android within its own life cycle, within that 7-year period. Does that make sense? Apologies if that doesn't make sense.
That would be something.
Which would be insane, right?
It would be, and I think it's some special mention, I guess. The Pixel 6 getting QPR1, 15 QPR1 is unexpected. per the original timeline, Android 15 proper should have been the last major release, but per its inclusion into the QPO beta cycle, it's at least getting that. So that sees it get an extra quarter of updates. That's interesting. But yeah, it's just like this December, the idea of what's happening next December. We're not even at this December yet, but the question is what's happening next December. I guess the top of my head, like you were alluding to, was form factors. Android tablets and foldables warranted Android 12L.
What's your dream product? What's your dream product in a format that potentially comes in this second wave of Android 16 in the Q4?
Android laptops. Yeah. So it's, I think a wearable. I think the headset Android XR happens way before then. Maybe it's for smart glasses. Maybe. But I'm pretty sure Android for that form factor is pretty finalized right now. Hell, it might even be 14. Whatever that thing, that's going to be on a different pace for a while, as we've seen with Wear OS. It took Wear OS a while to sync up even, but that's neither here nor there. But I think something more tangible outside of form factors is maybe letting app developers add more AI features, starting to be able to tap into stuff, maybe, with that Q4 release, which, since there's an API change, it's conceivable it'll be called a .1, or like we had the 12L, that was 12.1, and it was branded with the letter outward facingly, publicly. So I don't know, 16.1, maybe that's what it's called. I think it's either AI features or new form factor. It's hard for me to think about what that next 0.1 release brings at this point without knowing what 16 has first, of course.
I mean, obviously we don't have much longer to find out, but what about, there's one thing I wanted to discuss a tiny bit just before that, is obviously Google did mention it with regard to Pixel 10. Well, it doesn't explicitly mention Pixel 10, but it's preparing for those, for the next, getting in line with it, as you said slightly earlier.
Really, yes.
Do we think that this beta cycle and the developer preview cycle is going to reveal a lot more about the Pixel 10 potentially than we already seemingly know? Do you think there's going to be, obviously we do tend to find out things about these devices, the upcoming devices. Is there going to be killer features left behind? Because obviously we didn't see things like Pixel Studio, Pixel Screenshots, all of those things were kind of kept in-house when the Pixel 9 series launched. Do you think we're going to see a little bit more of that? Because I'm interested in how that plays out, because previously we haven't really had that many exclusive Pixel applications, right? Apart from maybe the weather application, but that's no here, no there.
Yeah, it's like, as Google shown with the Pixel 9, and how it got 3 new apps with weather, screenshots, and studio. That can absolutely be divorced from the Android cycle, the beta test cycle. But yeah, Pixel, it's the hardware feature. If there is novel hardware on the Pixel 10, we will start to see it in the betas. Will start affecting that. Stuff like UWB comes to mind. But yeah, it's going to be busy. It's really is going to be quite busy. It's going to be busy. I'm just thinking through all of it, and that's what I keep ending on.
Yeah, I think in terms of a year, it's been a year, hasn't it? So having maybe Google moved early, and now obviously Android 16 early, which was it was kind of alluded to earlier. I think there was some potential rumors surrounding that, but obviously nothing concrete. But now that Google have come out and said it, I think we've got a lot to sink our teeth into. So there's going to be potentially holiday Pixel developer preview coverage. And we're going to be
always fun,
which is always, well, it's a first for me, but yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. But yeah, if we see cool stuff, you will be the first to know over on the website. Obviously, we'll do deep dives, as we always do, into every version of Android, every intricate little detail that you can think of over on YouTube as well. That's our domain, right? So yeah, I'm excited. I'm kind of trepidatious as well, because I understand, like I said, there's a lot of work to go into it. But just say thanks for joining me today, Abner. I can't believe we're at episode 30 now. Yeah, we're 30 episodes in.
Episode 30.
And yeah, episode 30's ended with a bang. Android 16 is coming sooner than we think. I just want to say thanks for listening, and thanks for joining me, Abner.
Thanks, and bye.